This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And I'm excited about this topic today, Brian, because it's one we haven't talked about, and I think it's hugely important in the area of spiritual growth. I call it the problem of compartmentalization. So let me define what the hell I'm talking about.
Oh, please do.
Well, the problem is that people tend to bring their spiritual self, whatever that is, into certain parts of their life and not others. So the classic example might be, or extreme example might be, the person that goes to church 2 hours a week and then comes home and acts terribly abusive to his family. In one compartment, he's the spiritual church leader. In another compartment, he is abusive. And we hear of all these kind of scandals where gurus have sex scandals, or they're found to be doing weird things with money, and all the scandals that we hear about. And that's really just a symptom of compartmentalization, meaning that people are not bringing their true nature into areas of their life like money or sex or relationships or their body. And it's a real problem. And it's very hard to grow spiritually if you are not bringing these witness ability, this true nature, into these shadow elements. So I said a lot. What's your first impulse?
Well, the first impulse was that the first example that you gave, I wasn't quite sure what the difference was between that and just hypocrisy. But as you went further, I realized the truth of it, that we create a spiritual identity for ourselves as opposed to a true identity. And that, I think, is what's happening. And we don't bring that into all of our areas. And we don't look at, as you said, the shadow, at the dark side. But it seems to me, in my experience, that identifying with the true nature of pure awareness is identifying with unconditional love, and that there is a certain automatic kindness that happened where I might not have been before, that wasn't necessarily a conscious choice. On the other hand, I think that no matter how much spiritual attainment you feel you have, there is no substitute for simply doing the right thing in the world. And there is still, even if we are the universe looking out through our bodies, there still is a body, there still is relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my sense is that, well, let's look at life like they do in internal family systems, where there's, say, different parts of ourselves. There's the part that wants sex, there's a part that wants money, there's a part that acts a certain way in romantic relationships or other relationships. And what is going on today, even in the Epstein files, is you see that some people that you put on a high pedestal, well, there were parts of them that maybe were a little bit morally corrupt or not how we would want to think of spiritual leaders. And that's true of other leaders as well. And what people don't realize is that people do have different compartments, and they are what I would call more conscious in some compartments and very unconscious or have shadow material in other parts of themselves or their life. And the question becomes, if that's the model I'm using, how do you get that conscious awareness into these shadow elements or other compartments so that people are better human beings, are more conscious, they don't do as many stupid things? It's a real question. And I don't think the spiritual folk in the world have really grappled with that question very well.
Yeah, it is a thorny a thorny problem, and we see, because there are, people that we have put on a pedestal, spiritual leaders, and then we discover that they've done things that might be morally reprehensible. And part of the thorny part of it is that, in a certain sense, non-duality is not related to morality. It is
Mhm.
completely and utterly non-judgmental. And if that pure awareness allows everything to be, then it is not part of a moral system where something is good or something is bad. And that, I believe, is a very useful trait to help bring about happiness. But it is also a big trap
Mhm.
when you don't go all the way with it, when you don't bring it into every corner of your life. So I think your metaphor of compartmentalization is good, because what we don't do is we don't bring that pure, unconditional love into the parts of ourselves that we want to suppress. We don't bring it into seeing everybody through their own eyes, and imagining what it's like to be them, and imagine that we're the same underneath. When you don't do that, then the spirituality that you think you may have attained has not spread, has not somehow colored your the individual life. And this is a big, what we like to call the two-wing analogy. This is a big two-wing analogy issue. The perfection of the human being's personality and psychology is one wing. The knowing yourself as universal allowance, or spaciousness or true nature, is the other wing. And each one has nested within it the ability to deny the other.
Yeah. And lead to bad results.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I want to use a personal example so people have a better sense of what I mean. I like to think of myself as a spiritual guy. And yet, in my study of myself and in living with other spiritual seekers, I see that I had a bad habit of sometimes exaggerating things about my career. And it was mostly small ways. Like I would say, I had 3 New York Times bestsellers when it was really two. Or the one that got me in trouble is I said that I was a psychotherapist when I had not renewed my license in a couple of years. I was a psychotherapist for 35 years. But people, some people, not many, but some people put me on a pedestal and saw that I was sometimes speaking not precisely and accurately about my career. And they really attacked me. And it actually, if you remember, it cost me a lot of time, energy, and money and grief. And, in some ways I deserved it because that was a problem. I had a compartment called marketing myself and my career that didn't have the advantage of a little witness saying, hey, that's not totally accurate here.
Mhm.
And because I didn't have that part, I could sometimes say these slight exaggerations that were very problematic at one point. And that is the type of thing that happens with other people. You might have a spiritual witnessing awareness in many compartments of your life, but maybe not in, like a lot of people might not have it in the sex compartment or the money compartment. And they end up doing things that cause them a lot of trouble. And the question for me is always, how do you bring your true nature, that witnessing ability, into these compartments? I think if they were there more, that those things would automatically work themselves out without having to change it. Once I saw that my exaggerations about my career were causing trouble, and I didn't make excuses, I didn't call it what it wasn't, I just said, yeah, that's something that I have done. Then they pretty much stopped. My old teacher used to say, if you see dog poop on the road and you call it dog poop, you don't have to come up with a plan to not step in it. You won't step in it.
Well, I understand that analogy, and for me, there have been many, many flaws that I have that were glaringly obvious about myself. Things that I
Mhm.
did over and over again that I knew about. I knew were dog shit, and every day I went right on stepping in it. So the analogy, I don't think completely holds water to psychology,
Okay.
but I do think it does hold water to behavior. A lot of people might think it's the same thing, but I don't. So if you were doing the wrong, like I remember a friend of mine once said to me, you always have to be right. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's true. I've had these lengthy arguments with people which were nonsensical, and I prolonged because, damn it, I wanted to be right. And when he pointed that out, yes, it is. I did see the dog shit, and I did stop stepping in it. But so many of my fears and anxieties and bad qualities I knew about, absolutely knew about, and I kept stepping into them. And the only thing that softened them was when I softened my own judgment of myself over them, and I started identifying with the pure awareness in which they were appearing and stopped trying to fix it. And then the paradoxical thing is they fixed themselves when I stopped trying to fix them, or many of them did. Not all, but I don't.
Mhm.
They don't cause me pain and grief anymore, and my dealings with other people are kinder.
Well, the way I would put that in this compartment model is that you had a part of you that was very judgmental of these tendencies, psychological tendencies. And when instead of that judgment being the main thing going on there, you were more of your true nature, impartial, open awareness. And the flavor of the open, impartial awareness started to infiltrate those tendencies. So I would say that there's an example of what might be a difficult word, but decompartmentalization. And that's where the change happened. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think that's a very good description, actually, and seems to me to be accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem is that a lot of spirituality today is in very specific compartments. This is a compartment. People are going, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and they're listening and they're having hopefully a good experience with it, or church or synagogue or meditation. They are all spiritual compartments, but what is actually more effective is bringing your true nature into our shadow elements, as we talked about a couple podcasts ago, and bringing them into areas where it's badly needed, like in relationships. I as a former psychotherapist, I'm no longer a psychotherapist. As a former psychotherapist, I see a lot of spiritual people, quote spiritual people, who are truly mean or unconscious in their relationships and their communication. And that's an example of people don't really know what would it look like to bring more awareness, more consciousness into those compartments. How do you do it? Now, I lived in a spiritual group for 26 years, and probably 20 of those years were with a bunch of other people. And that was helpful because at least in the compartments around house and cleanliness and things like that, people could you could kind of like a rock tumbler see a softening going on as more awareness is brought into things like me being a slob. I used to be very much a slob. I am now much less of a slob because after living with a bunch of people pointing out, hey, you left a bunch of dishes in the sink, it brought, oh yeah, I am doing that, and I could see it, whereas before I was just dismissing it.
Mhm. So how do you bring awareness to the shadow sides other than having your bad habits be pointed out? Because most of the shadow parts, where we are hurting others, where we are maybe sexually abusing students, for example, if you're a well-known guru, or if you know, how do you do it? What is the what's
I'm
the
so glad you asked. Well, living with other spiritual seekers can help, but that's not going to happen for a lot of people. One very simple way is to tell your friends, partner, whoever, if you see me doing things that you think is off in some way in which I'm hurting other people, or I go very unconscious, I give you permission to point it out to me, because if I'm going unconscious, I don't see it. So I have done that with my friends, and on occasion they will mention something. And I have found that to be helpful. So that's one way. Another way is that you set the alarm. There's different apps on phones to set alarms randomly throughout the day. And during the alarm, I make sure that I use a technique like wordless or include. There's a lot of the methods that we've talked about, or, relax, allow, awareing, all these different tools that we've talked about, to see like, oh, what am I doing? Am I hurrying unnecessarily right now, which is a common thing for me? Am I doing three things at once right now as this alarm goes off? That's interesting. And by seeing it in these random compartments, I've found that that's another way of going about this. What are your thoughts? Do those make sense to you?
Yeah, they all make sense, but and I think they're fine. Uh, I want to go though a little deeper. Let's say you have a real dark side. Let's say you are Marty Supreme. Let's say you have a side that is so competitive and that you will hurt, you don't care who you hurt to get ahead. And you step over people and you hurt people, all in service of your blind ambition and your desire to get to the top of your so-called career. How do you bring that to awareness, or bring awareness to that?
Well, once again, I think it's a problem that most people don't, first of all. So having this model can help, because you can see, rather than think I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, you see that you're a very conscious person in these 7 compartments. You're a very unconscious, mean bastard in these 3 compartments. Just having that model can be useful. But as I mentioned, having friends that can point it out, that you trust, that can be very helpful. Hey, you just hurt this person, and what I saw go on, you might try to take a look at that, become more aware of what's going on there. That's one way. Certainly having the desire, the alarms. I think a couple podcasts ago, we talked to Tani and Leslie about dark types, knowing how shadow elements work and knowing an element. I recently got somewhat hurt by an old friend, and it was quite unpleasant. And the Tani and Leslie had talked about a certain part. They called it the spiteful self-pitier. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I almost never have experienced like wanting to hurt someone or blame or someone. I'm just not that type in how I interact. But when this person hurt me, I found like, wow, I'm thinking how I can hurt them back right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. I tried to play with it a little bit, because it was a pretty dark part. And I started to see it. Because I could see it, I could not act on it. Had I not, quote, seen it, God knows, maybe I would have written a really nasty letter back or tried to hurt them back. And luckily, just seeing it made me say, oh, okay, well, let it go,
Yeah,
like that.
I understand that, although I'm skeptical about the value of just seeing it. I just don't think it works all the time, and I don't think it really goes to the surface. Goes under,
To the death. Yeah.
beneath the surface, into the depths. And I know that in internal family systems, in voice dialogue, which I've studied with one of our previous guests, Bridget Dangle-Gaspard, in Leslie Antoni's episode about archetypes. They really talk about this part of you that you must hear, that has something to say, that is allowed. Because often what we'll do is we'll see it, and it's a compulsion. The compulsion to have sex with our students, the compulsion to hurt people to get ahead. It is a compulsion that seems beyond our control.
Mhm.
And we often don't want to look at it, even if it's pointed out. There's a
Yeah.
part of us that doesn't want to look at it. And but it from listening to in those three modalities that I just mentioned, when you really listen to what that part has to say without judging it and without splitting it off, without making it something bad, but not necessarily acting out on it, just sitting maybe with a trained facilitator in one of these modalities and really hearing what it has to say and realizing that there is love behind all of it, but it may be twisted.
Well, you make a good point that there's probably several ways to decompartmentalize, to bring more conscious awareness to these shadow elements, to bring more awareness to all these different parts. And one of them is, first just seeing it or knowing it's a problem. But yeah, what you're talking about is really more the IFS model, where you go into the different parts and you listen to them and you kind of develop a relationship with them where they're more loved rather than resisted or made bad. And as a former psychotherapist, I'm getting used to saying that, that I do work with people like that. And that is another modality. I don't, everybody has their political turf, like they're saying this is the best way to do it. I don't know what the best way to do it is. I think different people need different things at different times. But that's certainly one way of decompartmentalizing. The hard part is really the first step, which is seeing that this is a problem, and we do have to figure out how to lessen these strong boundaries from having more conscious awareness. And I see it all the time in people I work with and myself and spiritual seekers. A lot of spiritual seekers will have problems in the area of sex, drugs, and money.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you have a support network or you have a method for doing something different, that's the norm, is to be very compartmentalized.
Yeah, that's right.
I wish there was easy solutions that, you could just do this, but, it does require intention. With my tendency in the past to exaggerate, it required intention. It required therapy. It required telling my friends, if you ever hear me exaggerate something, let me know immediately. I want to catch it in the action.
Yeah.
And that's been very helpful. My wife says I'm not doing that anymore, so that's good. But it really does require seeing as a problem, having an intention, and having a method.
And it also requires an easing up of the death grip that you have on your identity as a certain type of person. In other
Yeah,
words, to see yourself as with strengths and weaknesses, with good points and with flaws, uh, and not having the desire to protect that identity. Is
yeah.
I think that's one thing that I believe that non-dual spirituality can help with, is softening that identity.
How so?
Because, and this is where I think the two-wing analogy comes to play. It's something that I've often resisted on this program, but when you are focused on your personality and what's wrong with you or what's right with you or how you interact with the world, you are creating an image of yourself. You're creating a self that you identify. And the non-dual approach is you're going behind that. You're asking, what does that identity appear in? What knows that? And you go back and back and
Right,
back, and you
right.
start to identify with something bigger than the personality, bigger than the body, bigger than the mind, bigger than the emotions, that is already here, that is allowing, that whose nature is unconditional love. And then the identity, the hold you have on protecting the identity of the Brian character and the Jonathan character weakens. It softens. It's
Yeah.
more permeable. It's more, and I think that that's the good approach. But there is, on the other hand, there each side of the wing has a trap for the other. The non-dual approach, I am pure awareness. The trap there is to forget this one simple thing. You are, unfortunately or fortunately, however way you want to put it, a human being in the world. I mean, you may be pure awareness, but pure awareness is manifesting itself, maybe only temporarily, maybe not separate from the universe, but as a human being in relation to others. And the one thing that you can't forget is do the right thing.
Hmm.
So I think you can boil it down to know that you are not the Brian character, the Jonathan character, the personality. You are pure, loving, unconditional awareness. And at the same time, always do the right thing.
Yeah. And, I think that is a great way to soften one's identity so you start to see these things more easily because you're no longer fully identified as being like bad or wrong in a situation. Another approach is that you really go into seeing, quote, you as made up of 50 parts, let's say. So when somebody points out, as my friends have, you have this part that has, at least in the past, exaggerated things about your career. And when they said that, rather than it being hit like, I am a wrong or bad or whatever, it was like, yeah, that part really is unconscious, which is much easier to handle. It's hard to handle if somebody says, you have cancer throughout your body. But if somebody says, you have cancer in your right pinky, and we need to, like do a little thing to take that out, that's a much easier ask and much easier for people to allow the shadow to be seen because they're not so quickly protecting themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm. So I think both those approaches are helpful, and it's a real issue in the world because until people can look at shadow stuff and bring their quote spiritual self, their true nature, whatever you want to call it, into their sexual problems, their money problems, their ways of dealing with people, then I don't think things are going to change in a mass scale until somehow we figure out how to do that more effectively.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, there are some people who in the non-dual world who will say that you're obsessed with changing the world and making it right, and you're not allowing everything to be as it is.
I do
And
have that part.
uh and they will argue, and I understand that point of view completely. Although I have a slightly, I think, more nuanced version of allowing what is, that you allow, what is like Byron Katie says, when you fight against reality you lose, but only 100% of the time. So you do allow exactly what's happening to be as it is because it's happening. But one of the things that is happening is sometimes you are called upon to take action. Like my
Mhm.
favorite analogy, you see a kid drowning in a river. You don't say, oh, it's God's will that the kid fell in the river. You said, this kid fell in the river and I'm an able-bodied adult who can swim, and I have to accept the fact that I'm called upon to take action here.
Yeah.
So when the non-dual spirituality denies that, when it denies the fact that sometimes allowing means allowing the fact that you must take action and do the right thing, then
Self honesty is required in all this.
yeah, that's true.
because there's so many ways to I don't know, corrupted spiritual bypass stuff, make excuses, and those are big obstacles to decompartmentalization. Our tendency to make excuses, our tendency to not be interested in feedback, our tendency to compartmentalize and think of ourselves as spiritual when we spend 10 minutes a day meditating or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And once we work on those, as if you're really interested in decompartmentalizing yourself, I love that word. It's about 11 syllables. But when you are interested in that, then you say, oh, well, I got to actually have an intention, look for it, be aware of the things that are in the way of seeing things more clearly in these shadow compartments.
Yeah, and I think that that's very true for that wing of the plane.
Yeah, yeah.
For the other wing of the plane, my experience was different. I had to, even though I knew of all those flaws and all those things that I was, as you described, the character flaws or the behavior that was perhaps not the most loving, or that all my attempts to change those about myself usually failed until
Yeah,
I
yeah, well,
really,
that's a different thing, Brian. That there is another wing where you're trying to change something, and that wing, has its value for sure.
but isn't that what
Uh,
you're talking about? Changing, fixing your personality?
no, no, I'm talking about the theory is that the more you bring conscious awareness to any area of your life, you don't have to change it. It's the old, dog poop thing. If you call a spade, if you call dog poop, you won't step in it. And that's more of a behavior thing. Now, with more subtle things like thoughts and whatever, that's a harder ask, and things don't change just from seeing it. But on a more behavioral scale, yeah, if you see something clearly, you tend not to do stupid stuff.
Well, I don't quite believe that's true because
Okay.
I think that people have compulsions that are deeper and stronger than just knowing that they exist. The point being pointed out. There are people for whom bad behavior is probably pointed out over and over again, but their compulsion to do it is so strong and so deep. So, you know,
The way I would say it is that they're in that moment, their access to their true nature is not deep enough for something to shift. If you were fully in your deep nature, true nature in that moment, it would shift. But that's almost impossible when a compulsion is really hard, is really big.
that's right, and I agree with you there that's what's happening. You're not, and that's why I think that it has to be incremental. In other
Mhm.
words, you stub your toe, you say, okay, what notices the pain in my toe? You have to start, oh, somebody got on the subway before I got off, and then it pissed me off. You have to notice who noticed Brian getting pissed off. You have to start small, and you have to have reminders to do that small moments many times a day, all day long, every day, until eventually the larger things can be brought to awareness and compulsions can be brought to awareness. I have this I have this incredible need to manipulate that person I'm attracted to, even though they're a student. Or, you know, you have to. I mean, you can't all of a sudden leap for
Big compulsions.
the big ones, the grand slams.
Yeah.
You
Well,
you have to have a base hit first and a few of them.
I totally agree. It really does involve small moments of awareness throughout the day. You're going to hit more of those previously hidden compartments. And to do it and to have those small moments in more compartments is really the key.
Yeah. But then people will fool themselves in saying, I am bringing love and compassion to myself, and therefore I'm allowing myself to do all these things that hurt other people. I mean, there's a lot of self-justification that's really tricky. And that that's an example where I think your approach would be helpful to point out the little tricky self-justifications people play,
Yeah, and
especially in the spiritual world.
yeah, to bring conscious awareness to those justifications and excuses. That's a
Yeah, right,
compartment.
right, right.
It's one that's hard for people to see unless they have friends pointing it out, perhaps.
Yeah, so so they both have their flaws. On one side, if you're concerned about your personality and how to fix what's wrong, then you're taking attention away from your true nature, which is bigger than the personality. But if your attention is all on the true nature without regard to how humans interact with each other in a harmonious way, then you're stuck on the other wing.
So balancing the two wings is our conclusion once more, Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, as much as I've argued against the two-wing analogy, it becomes harder and harder.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good, good. I vindicated. No, no.
But I still think, but I still think I'm right.
Well, good. I'll let you have that.
No, it's often fun to have a point of view that you're pretty sure is right, and to hear someone else, skillfully propose the opposite.
Yeah, I think that's
It
one
can
of
be
the
fun.
benefits. I think that's one of the benefits of our podcasts for our listeners is sometimes we provide different ideas that are helpful, that might be different than their previous idea. And of course, you and I do this frequently and both benefit from being able to hear each other and expand our view beyond our own BS, which is an acronym for belief system.
Yeah, I like that.
Anyways, with that, I think I'm going to do a guided meditation on this.
Swell.
And it will be a little bit different than most our guided meditations in that it will be more of a visualization in some ways, but I think it will be valuable. So if you can, make yourself comfortable and get ready. Take a couple of deep breaths, relax. I want you to start out by thinking of a compartment in your life that's been challenging to you in the past. It could be your work compartment or your sex life or relationship. Maybe it's dealing with finances or your parenting compartment or any specific compartment in your life, but just choose one for now, especially one that you think has less consciousness or is more challenging to you. Great. As you think of this compartment, I want you to get a sense of how much impartial witnessing or conscious awareness you bring to that specific compartment. Might be little, none, a lot, but get a sense of how much. And ask yourself if you get easily triggered in this area of your life, or maybe you avoid it, or any other behavior that sometimes leads to inharmonious behavior. If you notice there's a lack of awareness in this area, imagine what it would look like to double or triple the amount of non-judgmental witnessing in this compartment. See yourself as more aware or more of a witness as opposed to reacting or what you might normally do. Just imagine it. Just by bringing more of your true nature into this area, do you think different behaviors would result? Would you have more peace or more connection with others if you were say, less triggered or more aware in this compartment? Now imagine yourself at your best, most peaceful, most connected to your true nature, and fully present. Breathe in that sense of presence, being here now, resting in beingness. Now, once again, go back to the compartment that has given you trouble and imagine watching yourself act in the reactive ways you have often been in that area of your life. See if you can get insight into what obstacles show up that trigger reactiveness and impede your true nature. What obstacles show up in that compartment? For example, do you get caught up in achievement or self-righteousness or needing approval or avoidance or some other obstacle that crowds out your true nature? Now imagine if those obstacles were gone in that compartment, just poof, they disappear. How much more free and even more effective could you be in that area? And imagine yourself being your more conscious self in this compartment and what that might look like. And notice after this meditation if there's any interesting shift that happens in this compartment of bringing more conscious awareness to it. And if you want, you might set some kind of intention and see if that does help bring greater witnessing, more peace to this particular compartment in your life. And slowly become aware of your seat, presence of the sensations in your body, the sounds in the room, feeling the peace inside you. And when you're ready, take as much time as you need. Come back to slowly opening your eyes and looking forward to the potential shifts that are ahead. Welcome back.
Thank you.
That was a little bit different type of meditation. Any thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's very useful. I found that I noticed that there is an area that I resist bringing to consciousness, or I resist dropping back in awareness when it arises. So, in that way, having it pointed out to me, having noticed it through the meditation, that, oh, yeah, that's one area in my life where I don't often or as often just step back and be awareness. The other reaction I had to it is that I just want to emphasize for people that when you do an exercise like this, make sure you're not going into the story about the situation that you're applying it to. Make sure
Yeah.
you're really just bringing it to awareness, or bringing awareness to it, however way you want to put it, noticing it, being the noticing, being the larger, and not getting involved in an elaborate verbal story about it. That's my
Yeah.
only caveat, and not that I think you encourage that, but I just want to remind people of that.
Yeah, an important point. And I'm glad that it came up for you, a specific compartment. And I think it can be helpful as one step in bringing more awareness and more healing and more peace to ourselves as we decompartmentalize and spread the love throughout all aspects of our life.
Well, if that ain't happening, then what the heck's it all good for? And yes,
Exactly,
spread the love
exactly.
and the peace. That's what it's all about. And one phrase that one of my main teachers, Locke Kelly, used a lot that this whole episode reminded me of is both and.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You know, we are spirit. We are the universe experiencing itself through human temporary forms, but there are still human temporary forms. So we're spirit and body, and we have flaws and we have strengths, and some behavior is harmonious and some is not.
In fact, that's a specific technique I sometimes use, and I call it the I am X and Y technique. And the technique is like, let's say I'm annoyed at somebody, and just internally I'll say, I am annoyed and I am conscious awareness.
Very
And
good.
it really helps me to see both realities at the same time, and
Mm.
is a certain form of decompartmentalization because I am recognizing that I'm going through this very human thing. It might be I am, the politics has been difficult, news has been difficult. I'm feeling despairing, and I am pure conscious love,
Mhm.
and it really does bring a different flavor to the human parts, to realize that those human parts are within the greater context of pure awareness.
Beautiful. I think that's really helpful. I hope, yeah, I think it'd be great if people tried that, and it's good,
Mhm.
good, good technique.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of love, spreading the love, if you want to spread your love to us, become a Patreon supporter if you're not already. We give lots of extra stuff to our supporters at any level of support, but you can go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And good exploration, Brian. I hope it touches our listeners in a way that encourages or inspires them to bring more awareness to a compartment that may have been locked out in the past.
Great, interesting topic. Thanks for bringing it.
Sure thing. Until next time, friends, just keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.